She had been working in that hangar for nearly 3 years, her presence barely noticed by those around her. Every day, like clockwork, she arrived before dawn, dressed in standard issue coveralls that bore no insignia, no rank, and certainly no name tag. She moved with quiet precision, mopping the endless expanse of cold, gray concrete that stretched beneath massive fighter jets and helicopters. Engines roared overhead, boots marched past her, but no one ever stopped to ask her name. To them, she was background. A fixture. Just the janitor. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her eyes, always downcast, told of someone who had seen more than she let on. There was a calm in her movements, a discipline in the way she cleaned each section of the floor, like every streak of dirt was a mission to be completed with exactitude. Most of the young recruits didn't notice her. They stepped around her mop bucket, sometimes nearly bumping into her without so much as a glance. Even the older officers treated her like a ghost, present, yet completely invisible. But something about her stood out, if one paid close enough attention. The way she folded her rag. The way her boots were laced, tightly, perfectly, always polished even though no one ever looked down. The way she paused at exactly 0800 and 1700, standing silently by the hangar doors, facing the flag. It wasn't required of her. No one told her to. But every day without fail, she stopped whatever she was doing and gave the same quiet moment of respect as any enlisted soldier. There were rumors, of course. Some said she used to be someone. Others joked she might be an ex-spouse of a CO who took pity on her. A few whispered about an injury, a scandal, a discharge that wasn't honorable. No one really knew. No one really asked. After all, she was just the woman with the mop. But if you watched her long enough, you'd see things that didn't quite fit. Her posture, too straight. Her awareness, too sharp. She never flinched at the sound of gunfire during exercises, never blinked when a jet engine screamed to life. Her hands, though worn and aged, had calluses in the places you'd expect from years of handling something heavier than a mop handle. Sometimes, the more observant Marines would notice a faded tattoo barely visible under the edge of her sleeve, something that looked vaguely military, but they never dared ask. She never interrupted anyone. She never entered the restricted zones. But she always seemed to know when to move, where not to stand, how to disappear just before officers came through. It was like muscle memory, embedded so deep in her bones that she didn't even think about it. There was a certain sadness in her eyes, too. Not the kind that cried for sympathy, but the kind that made you wonder what battles she'd fought, and not just the ones overseas. Maybe it was the way she paused when looking at old aircraft, or how she seemed to linger near the photographs hanging in the back corridor of the hangar, the ones of squadrons long since disbanded, faces that had become ghosts of their own. She didn't seek attention. She never asked for more hours, never complained about her tasks. She worked holidays, double shifts, even stormy nights when others called out. Always early, never late. Always present, never noticed. To most, she was just mopping the floor until one Marine, one day, looked her in the eyes and saw something different. It was a typical Thursday morning in the hangar. The hum of machinery filled the air, mixed with the chatter of mechanics and the rhythmic cadence of boots hitting concrete. Flight crews ran diagnostics on grounded aircraft while a fresh wave of recruits moved equipment from one side of the bay to the other. Amid the controlled chaos, she was there, pushing her mop, shoulders low, eyes steady on the floor. Few noticed her, as usual. But one Marine did. He was young, but not green. Corporal, by the stripes on his sleeve, with sharp eyes and a gait that spoke of training he hadn't yet forgotten. He had arrived only 2 weeks earlier, transferred from a coastal unit. People said he had seen something classified. Some said he was recovering from trauma. But his bearing suggested discipline, and his silence didn't feel like avoidance, it felt like calculation. That morning, as she swept the floor near the AH-1Z Viper stationed in Bay 4, he stopped mid-step. For a second, His eyes caught hers. It wasn't a casual glance. It was like he recognized something. He stood still, watching her finish one smooth arc of the mop across the stained concrete. Then, something in his posture shifted. He didn't call her ma'am like civilians sometimes mistakenly do when trying to show respect. He didn't bark at her to move or ask why she was so close to a restricted aircraft. Instead, he walked straight toward her, slowly, like approaching something sacred. As he neared, other Marines noticed. A few eyebrows lifted. Some exchanged silent glances. No one had ever approached the janitor like this, not with focus, not with purpose. But the corporal didn't seem to care. He moved with clarity, boots echoing off the steel walls until he stood directly in front of her. She looked up, not startled, not defensive, but quietly curious. Their eyes locked again. This time longer. There was a flicker of something behind his confusion, recognition, maybe even awe. Then he did something that froze the hangar. He straightened his spine, squared his shoulders, and brought his heels together with a precision that could have only come from muscle memory drilled into him during boot camp. He raised his hand in a sharp salute, not out of sarcasm, not mockery, but full, formal military respect. After lowering it, he did something even stranger. "Permission to speak, ma'am?" he asked, his voice firm but reverent. The sentence rang out louder than it should have. Not because of volume, but because of silence. Conversations halted. A wrench clanged to the floor. Even the whirring turbine across the hangar seemed to dull under the weight of his words. Every head turned toward them, toward the janitor with a mop and the Marine standing at attention. No one moved. She didn't respond right away. She looked at him, not through him, not past him, but into him. Her face unreadable. The mop handle still in her hand. The space between them felt charged, not with confrontation, but with buried truths neither of them had expected to face that morning. The corporal didn't waver. His eyes never dropped. His hands stayed firm by his side. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't theater. Something in her presence had triggered a response in him that protocol couldn't explain. It wasn't about her uniform, she wasn't wearing one. It wasn't about rank, she had none displayed. It was something else. Some of the older officers, watching from across the floor, began to whisper. One of them, a gunnery sergeant with 30 years behind him, narrowed his eyes, like he too was trying to place a memory. Something long forgotten. Something that had worn a different uniform and stood behind a different mission. The hangar buzzed with speculation after that moment. Word spread quickly, as it always did in places like this, tight-knit, steel-walled spaces where rumors traveled faster than aircraft engines could roar. By lunchtime, everyone knew about the Marine who had asked the janitor for permission to speak. They replayed the moment like a scene out of a classified film, his posture, the salute, the unexpected gravity of his request. Some dismissed it as confusion. Others thought it might have been a prank or a test of protocol. But those who were there, who saw it happen with their own eyes, knew better. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't forced. The way he had looked at her, like she was someone who had authority, history, and weight, left no room for jokes. That same afternoon, someone made a quiet call to the personnel office asking for her file. What came back was nearly blank. Her employment records were generic, civilian contractor designation, janitorial services. No photo, no background, no prior assignments. Just a line that read, contract active since 2022, cleared for limited access areas. And then, in bold letters, no further inquiry. That kind of red tape was not normal. One of the senior warrant officers decided to dig deeper. Not out of suspicion, but curiosity. He had seen something familiar in her stance earlier, a slight readiness, like someone always prepared to respond to threat or command. It wasn't something you picked up mopping floors. It was something drilled into you under pressure, across continents, under fire. Later that evening, he checked a dusty archive buried on an old secure drive in his office. It wasn't meant for easy access, but he knew his way around it. As he sifted through outdated mission logs from more than a decade ago, a black-and-white photo caught his eye. It showed a unit overseas, Afghanistan, possibly. The photo had faded, names half-blurred by time, but he recognized a face on the far left. Same eyes. Same jawline. Same stillness and expression. She hadn't been a janitor then. She wore tactical gear, a headset clipped to her shoulder, and an insignia that wasn't standard issue. She wasn't standing in the middle of the group. She was slightly off to the side, but her presence was commanding. And under her name tag, barely visible, was a unit patch that hadn't been seen in active operations in years. The unit itself had been classified, its missions redacted even from internal records. All he remembered was a whisper, Task Force Ember. Rumors said they were deployed in operations so deep, not even their failures made it into the books. They were ghosts. Operatives trained to vanish into chaos and leave no footprints behind. He clicked to the next document and stopped cold. A declassified after-action report, mostly blacked out. But a section mentioned an operative by call sign Whisper 3, presumed Kia after a failed extraction in hostile territory. There was no body recovered. Just a final GPS ping and then silence. The timestamp of that incident was almost exactly 10 years ago. And her face, it was unmistakable. The officer sat back in his chair, a chill running through him. If that was truly her, and every fiber of his being told him it was, then she had returned from the dead, literally and officially. But not as a war hero. Not as a speaker or instructor. She had come back as someone the system tried to bury under a mop handle and a blank civilian file. If her story was classified, then her silence wasn't just discipline, it was survival. She had been erased, yet here she was, still showing up before dawn, still honoring the flag. The truth, hidden in files and half-remembered photos, was starting to leak through the cracks. No one in the hangar had ever seen the patch. Not clearly, at least. It was usually hidden beneath her rolled-down sleeves or obscured by the strap of her cleaning cart. But that morning, after the Marine's salute and his quiet, respectful request to speak, more eyes had begun watching her closely. A quiet ripple of attention followed her everywhere she went, subtle but unmistakable. And when she reached up to fix the handle of her mop, her sleeve rode up, just an inch, but enough to reveal something that didn't belong on a civilian contractor. It was faded with time, the edges fraying, the stitching barely intact. But those who had been around long enough recognized the outline. It wasn't part of any active unit. In fact, most thought it had been decommissioned. Some didn't believe it had ever officially existed. A black falcon clutching 3 lightning bolts, framed inside a hexagon with no motto, no country, no identifier, just shadow. No one wore it anymore. No one was supposed to. A younger tech sergeant caught a glimpse of it while passing and froze mid-step. He had seen it once on a file that had been locked inside a steel cabinet at Joint Base Lewis McChord. That file had come with a warning: do not copy. Do not scan. Do not discuss. And yet, here it was. On the arm of a woman scrubbing hydraulic fluid off a hangar floor. He whispered to one of the airmen, who whispered to another, and within hours, half the personnel in that building had heard some version of the story. No one agreed on the full truth. Some said she had been a deep cover operative. Others claimed she was part of a failed extraction team that vanished during a NATO joint strike. One version said she had once stopped a detonation in a mountain pass using nothing but a signal jammer and sheer nerve. Another claimed she was the only survivor of a black site raid gone sideways. The stories were wild, disconnected, but all of them had one common thread: the patch. Someone from base security tried to make a report. He snapped a blurry photo from a distance, intending to run it through the system. But when he uploaded it, the screen flickered and shut down. A system lockout appeared with a code that redirected him to a high-clearance channel. Within 10 minutes, he received a call not from his commanding officer, but from an unknown voice advising him to drop the inquiry and delete the photo. Permanently. The next morning, when she arrived for her shift, she wore a new long-sleeved shirt. The patch was gone, or at least hidden again. But the rumors hadn't died down. If anything, the mystery grew louder. Some of the veterans who had spent time in special operations started paying closer attention. One even claimed he remembered hearing the call sign Whisper 3 over comms in northern Syria during a mission that never made it into the records. He said the voice was calm under pressure, female, and carried authority even the field commanders didn't question. Someone else mentioned the phrase, "burn the mark." It was what certain deep cover operatives were told to do when leaving the field permanently. Erase every symbol, patch, tattoo, or indicator of who they were. Burn it. Forget it. Never speak of it again. If she had kept the patch, if she had chosen not to destroy it, it meant something. Maybe it was rebellion. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was the only proof she had left that any of it was real. Whatever the reason, she had kept it. Not in a frame, not locked in a box, but on her body, beneath the same sleeves she used to wipe grease off the walls. A symbol meant to be erased had survived. And now, the hangar was no longer looking at her as a janitor. They were looking at her like a page torn from a book no one was supposed to read. It started with a glance from the colonel. He had been walking through the hangar with his usual stride, efficient, purposeful, detached. His presence alone was enough to straighten backs and silence small talk. People respected him, feared him, even. He didn't waste words, didn't suffer delays, and had no patience for anything outside of protocol. But something made him stop that morning. She was working near the rear loading area, bent over a rust-streaked corner where rain had crept through the steel walls. She didn't notice him at first. Her focus was entirely on the task, scrubbing methodically, without pause. Her movements weren't hurried, but they were practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times before, and probably had. The colonel had passed by her many times over the past year, never giving her more than a second thought. But this time, as she reached up to wring out her rag, the fabric of her sleeve shifted again. Something caught his eye. It wasn't the patch. That was hidden. It was the tattoo beneath it. A thin line of ink, faded but visible under her wrist. Barely anything. Most wouldn't have noticed. But he did. He froze mid-step. The officers walking with him didn't notice right away. It wasn't until he stopped completely, brows drawn low, eyes fixed on her hand, that the others began to slow down. One of them asked if something was wrong. The colonel didn't answer. His gaze remained locked on her on that mark, one he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. He stepped forward slowly. She looked up, sensing someone approaching. For the briefest moment, her body tensed, not visibly, not in a way most would detect, but the colonel saw it. A readiness. The kind a soldier carries long after they've been told they can rest. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a memory neither of them had spoken aloud. The colonel's expression shifted. He was trying to place something her face, that mark, the way she stood, the silence in her eyes. His lips parted, not to bark an order, but to ask a question. Then, as if searching for confirmation, he stepped even closer and gently touched the edge of her sleeve. He lifted it, just enough to see what was hidden beneath. The patch was gone, but under it, stitched faintly into the fabric, almost invisible, was a shadow of what had once been there. The threads had been burned, the shape warped from time and heat, but to someone who had seen it before, it was unmistakable. He inhaled sharply. The air shifted around them. Officers nearby fell silent. One of them stepped back instinctively, unsure what was unfolding. The colonel didn't speak for several long seconds. When he did, his voice was lower than anyone had ever heard it, less like a superior, more like someone who'd seen a ghost. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but not as a warning. More like a fact he couldn't reconcile. She looked up at him again, her eyes calm, steady. Her mouth didn't move. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. He recognized her now. Not from files. Not from base clearance rosters. From memory. From a place half a world away, where things went wrong and heroes were told to vanish. Her name had been whispered in a debrief long ago, followed by silence, sealed folders, and the order to forget. He had followed that order. Until now. Now, standing in the middle of a military hangar in peacetime, he was staring at someone who had once been more than an asset. More than a name on a mission log. She had led men through fire. She had been counted among the few who didn't just survive, but held others together in the chaos. And then she disappeared, buried under layers of secrecy and silence. From that day forward, everything changed, not by announcement, not by formal recognition, but through quiet shifts that rippled through the hangar like wind beneath sealed doors. The same woman who had once been seen as little more than part of the background now moved through the space with an aura no one could ignore. She hadn't asked for anything. She didn't speak more than usual. Her routine hadn't changed. Still early, still precise, still cleaning in silence. But those around her? They saw her differently. You could tell in the way Marines stepped aside now when she pushed her cart through narrow corridors. They didn't say much, didn't make a show of it, but their posture changed. Less dismissive. More aware. Some even offered quiet nods, unsure of what was appropriate, but sensing something deserved. The younger recruits, who once joked or rolled their eyes when told to respect everyone on base, now walked past her a little straighter. The story had spread beyond the hangar, beyond the base. Whispers turned into caution. Caution turned into quiet respect. A maintenance crewman once approached her and simply said, "Ma'am," before offering her his spot in the break room. She declined, as always, but the gesture didn't go unnoticed. Another time, during a storm drill, an officer offered her shelter in the command outpost, an offer never extended to civilian staff. She didn't take it, choosing instead to stay where she always did, at the far end of the hangar near the supply cages. But again, the message was clear. Things were shifting. Then came the day a former SEAL, brought in to consult on tactical protocols, walked through the hangar and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her. He didn't say a word. Just watched her mop a section of the floor for nearly a full minute before he whispered something to the officer escorting him. The officer turned pale. That SEAL never explained who she was or what he knew. But later that afternoon, a classified file vanished from the base archives. And a message was sent through a secure channel, marked with a clearance code not used in over a decade. People started speculating again, but now their tone had changed. She wasn't just a mystery anymore. She was a reminder. A living, breathing piece of history that someone had tried very hard to erase. Not everyone understood what she'd done, but those who mattered began to accept what was becoming increasingly clear. This woman wasn't just another civilian filling a role. She had earned something no title could bestow. One day, someone placed a small American flag beside her cart. No one saw who did it. It was just there one morning, wedged into the side between two cleaning cloths. She didn't remove it. She didn't acknowledge it. But it stayed there, day after day, a quiet declaration in red, white, and blue. The real shift, though, wasn't in protocol or posture. It was in memory. People began to say her name more often, but only when they were sure no one else could hear. They remembered the story about a woman who had been declared Kia, about a unit that officially didn't exist. They remembered the Marine who had stood at attention for her, the colonel who had looked her in the eyes and forgotten how to speak. They remembered the tattoo, the burned patch, the faded threads that stitched her legacy to a forgotten war. She had returned not for medals or apologies, but to serve in silence again on her terms. And now, with each passing day, more people came to realize the truth. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to remind them of what they were supposed to stand for, of who paved the way before them, of the kind of soldier who didn't need recognition to have earned respect.